Moving into a new house should feel like a dream come true. For Jessica, it absolutely was. She'd spent years saving up, searching for the perfect place, and finally she found it. A beautiful 2-story home with a cozy front porch in Riverside Meadows, a neighborhood that looked like it came straight out of a magazine. The streets were clean, the lawns were neat, and everyone seemed friendly during her first week there. Jessica spent her first few weekends making the place feel like home. She painted the guest bedroom a soft blue, hung up family photos in the hallway, and even bought a cute little garden gnome to place next to her flower bed. It was one of those whimsical gnomes with a red hat and a fishing rod. She thought it added character to her otherwise plain front yard. Everything seemed perfect until the letter arrived. It came in a fancy envelope with the HOA logo stamped on it. Jessica had heard about homeowner associations before, but never really paid much attention. She knew they existed to keep neighborhoods looking nice and organized. No big deal, right? She opened the envelope and started reading. The letter was from Patricia Henley, the HOA president. It politely but firmly informed Jessica that her garden gnome was in violation of community standards. According to the letter, lawn decorations were only permitted if they were tasteful, seasonal, and approved by the board. Her gnome, apparently, was none of those things. The letter requested she remove it within 5 business days or face a fine of $50. Jessica stood there in her kitchen, reading the letter twice to make sure she understood it correctly. A fine for a garden gnome? It seemed ridiculous, but she didn't want trouble. She was new to the neighborhood and wanted to fit in. So she picked up the gnome, brushed off some dirt, and tucked it away in her garage. Problem solved, or so she thought. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This time it was about her mailbox. Jessica went outside to look at it, confused about what could possibly be wrong. It was just a standard mailbox, the same kind everyone else had. But according to Patricia's letter, the mailbox was painted the wrong shade of black. The approved color was midnight black, and Jessica's mailbox was, apparently, charcoal black. She was given 7 days to repaint it or face a $100 fine. Jessica felt her frustration building but told herself to stay calm. She went to the hardware store, bought a can of midnight black paint, and spent an afternoon repainting the mailbox. She even painted the post to make sure everything matched perfectly. Surely this would be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next month, Jessica received 4 more letters. One complained that her car was parked 3 inches past the edge of her driveway, extending slightly onto the sidewalk area. Another stated that her trash cans were visible from the street for 17 minutes longer than the permitted time on collection day. Jessica had brought them in as soon as she got home from work, but apparently that wasn't fast enough. There was even a letter about the way she'd arranged her recycling bins, claiming they were not aligned in an orderly fashion. Each letter came with a fine. $50 here, $75 there. Jessica was keeping track, and the total was climbing toward $500 for things she didn't even realize were problems. She'd read through her HOA agreement when she bought the house, and none of these specific rules were mentioned in the document she'd signed. One evening, after receiving yet another violation notice about her front porch light being on past 11 at night, Jessica decided enough was enough. She dug out her HOA paperwork from the filing cabinet and started reading through every single page. She highlighted sections, took notes, and cross-referenced the violations she'd received with the actual rules in the bylaws. What she found shocked her. Most of the violations Patricia had cited weren't actually in the official HOA rules. There was no mention of specific paint colors for mailboxes. There was nothing about garden gnome restrictions. The parking rule existed, but it stated vehicles must not block the sidewalk, which her car never did. The trash can rule was real, but it allowed for a 2-hour window after collection, not the impossible 30-minute window Patricia was enforcing. Jessica felt a mix of anger and relief. She wasn't crazy, and she wasn't a bad neighbor. Someone was making up rules that didn't exist. She decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center. When Thursday came, Jessica walked into the meeting room with her folder of documents, highlighted bylaws, and a list of questions. About 15 other residents were scattered around the room. Patricia sat at the front table with 3 other board members, all looking official with their name tags and leather folders. Jessica waited patiently through the usual boring meeting stuff. Budget reports, landscaping discussions, and complaints about someone's dog barking Finally, when they opened the floor for resident concerns, Jessica raised her hand. Patricia looked at her with a tight smile. "Yes, you must be our newest resident. Jessica, isn't it?" "That's right," Jessica said, standing up with her folder. "I wanted to discuss the violation notices I've been receiving. I've gone through the HOA bylaws carefully, and several of the violations you've cited aren't actually in our governing documents." The room got quiet. A few residents leaned forward in their seats, suddenly interested. Patricia's smile didn't waver. "I assure you, Mrs. Jessica, all violations are based on our comprehensive community standards." "But they're not in the bylaws," Jessica pressed, opening her folder. "For example, the mailbox color. I've read through the entire architectural guidelines section, and there's no specification about midnight black versus charcoal black. It just says mailboxes should be dark-colored and well-maintained." One of the other board members, an older man with glasses, shifted uncomfortably. Patricia's smile finally faded. "The board has the authority to interpret and enforce standards as we see fit. That's clearly stated in Section 7 of the bylaws." Jessica flipped to Section 7. "It says the board can create reasonable rules with proper notice and resident input. But I never received notice about these specific requirements, and from what I can tell, neither did anyone else." Another resident, a middle-aged woman sitting near the back, spoke up. "She's right. I got fined last month for having my porch furniture uncovered during the week. I couldn't find that rule anywhere either." Patricia's face was turning red. "These meetings are for productive discussion, not for questioning the board's authority. If you have concerns about specific violations, you can submit them in writing and we'll review them." "I'd like to submit a formal appeal," Jessica said firmly, "for all of my violations, based on the actual bylaws we all agreed to follow." Patricia gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. "Your appeal is noted. The board will vote on it." Meeting adjourned. The three other board members quickly voted to deny Jessica's appeal, barely looking at her documentation. As everyone filed out, a few residents approached Jessica in the parking lot. "Good for you for speaking up," one man said quietly. "Patricia runs this place like she owns it." "Be careful, though," an older woman warned. "She doesn't like being challenged. She made life miserable for the last person who questioned her." Jessica drove home that night with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She'd done everything by the book, been respectful, and brought proof. But it didn't matter. Patricia had the power, and she clearly wasn't afraid to use it. What Jessica didn't know yet was that things were about to get much worse. The violation notices were just the beginning. Patricia didn't just dislike being challenged. She took it as a personal insult, and she was already planning her next move. As Jessica pulled into her driveway, she noticed a car parked across the street with someone sitting inside. The person seemed to be looking at her house. When Jessica glanced over, the car quickly drove away. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the stress of the HOA situation was getting to her, but deep down she knew something wasn't right. And she was about to find out just how far some people will go to maintain control over their little kingdom, even when they have no real right to that power at all. The week after the board meeting, Jessica tried to go about her normal routine. She went to work, came home, and kept her head down. She made absolutely sure her trash cans were put away immediately. Her car was perfectly centered in her driveway, and her porch light was off by 10:30 every night. She didn't want to give Patricia any ammunition, but Patricia didn't need ammunition. She was creating it. Jessica came home from work on Tuesday to find another certified letter waiting for her. She signed for it with a sense of dread, already knowing it wouldn't be good news. Inside was a detailed list of violations, and the fines had jumped dramatically. According to the letter, Jessica owed $3,500 in accumulated violations, late fees, and administrative charges. Jessica's hands shook as she read through the list. Some of the violations were repeats of things she'd already been fined for and fixed. Others were completely new and absolutely absurd. Her front door wreath was apparently a violation because it wasn't a seasonal decoration. The flowers in her garden bed were listed as non-approved plantings. Even the way her curtains were visible from the street was cited as a violation of the neighborhood's uniform appearance standards. The letter ended with a threat that made Jessica's stomach drop. If the fines weren't paid within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on her property and potentially begin foreclosure proceedings. Jessica had heard horror stories about HOAs foreclosing on homes over unpaid fines, but she never imagined it could happen to her over fake violations. She spent the entire evening researching HOA law, reading through forums and calling lawyer offices. Most attorneys wanted retainer fees she couldn't afford on top of the house payment she'd just started making. One lawyer did give her some free advice over the phone, though. He told her to document everything, attend every board meeting, and formally dispute every single charge in writing. That Friday, Jessica sent a certified letter back to the HOA board, formally disputing each violation with references to the actual bylaws. She kept copies of everything and started a detailed spreadsheet tracking every interaction, every letter, and every fine. She also did something else. She went to the hardware store and bought 2 security cameras. She installed one pointing at her front door and driveway, and another covering her backyard. Her neighbor, an older man named Mr. Chen, who lived 2 houses down, stopped by while she was installing the cameras. "Smart move," he said, glancing around nervously. "You're not the first person Patricia's gone after like this. Most people just pay the fines or move away because it's easier than fighting. Has she done this to you?" Jessica asked. Mr. Chen nodded. "Last year. I travel a lot for work, and she fined me because my grass grew a 1/4 inch too long while I was gone for a week. When I tried to dispute it, the fines kept multiplying. I ended up paying almost $2,000 just to make it stop. It felt like extortion, but what could I do?" Jessica felt her anger growing. "Did you keep any of the documentation?" "Some of it. Why?" "Because I think she's been doing this to a lot of people and someone needs to stop her." Mr. Chen looked uncomfortable. "Be careful. She has friends on the city council. She's connected. People who fight her usually lose." After Mr. Chen left, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just her situation. That night, she decided to do something that might be risky but felt necessary. She created a private social media group for Riverside Meadows residents and posted an invitation in the neighborhood app, asking if anyone else had experienced similar issues with the HOA. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 days, 37 people had joined the group and started sharing their stories. One family had been fined repeatedly while the husband was deployed overseas with the military. An elderly couple on a fixed income had nearly lost their home over violations they couldn't afford to fix. A single mother had been cited for having her kids' bicycles visible in the driveway. The stories went on and on. Jessica began compiling all the information into a master document. Patterns emerged quickly. Patricia targeted certain people more than others, usually newer residents who didn't know the rules, elderly homeowners who seemed easier to intimidate, or anyone who questioned her authority. The fines were always inflated with mysterious administrative fees, and most concerning, several people noticed that after they paid large fines, new landscaping or improvements would appear in the common areas near Patricia's house. One person in the group, a woman named Beth who worked in accounting, offered to look at the HOA's financial records. As a homeowner, she had the legal right to request them. What she found was disturbing. There were dozens of transactions that didn't add up. Money would come in from fines and dues, but large chunks of it would disappear into vaguely labeled expenses. Receipts were missing for major purchases. The HOA's reserve fund, which should have had over $50,000, showed a balance of less than $8,000. Jessica shared this information with the group, and they decided to request a special meeting to address their concerns. HOA bylaws required the board to hold a special meeting if at least 20% of homeowners requested it. They had more than enough signatures, but before they could submit the formal request, things took a darker turn. Jessica started noticing cars driving slowly past her house at odd hours. Sometimes the same car would circle the block multiple times. She checked her security camera footage and saw Patricia herself, walking around Jessica's property after dark, taking photos with her phone. In one clip, Patricia was accompanied by another board member, and they were making notes on a clipboard while examining Jessica's fence line, her plants, and even peering into her garage windows. Jessica felt violated. She made backup copies of all the footage and stored them in 3 different places, including a cloud service and a thumb drive she kept at work. Then came the breaking point. Jessica arrived home late one evening after working overtime to find an official-looking notice taped to her front door. It wasn't another violation letter. This one claimed to be a legal summons requiring her to appear before something called HOA court to answer for her repeated violations and willful disregard for community standards. Jessica brought the notice inside and examined it closely. Something felt off. The language was strange, mixing legal-sounding terms with phrases that didn't make sense. She took photos of it and sent them to one of the lawyers she'd consulted earlier. He called her back within an hour. "This is fake," he said bluntly. "There's no such thing as HOA court in this state. HOAs can fine you, place liens, and even foreclose through the actual court system, but they can't create their own courts. This is either someone's idea of intimidation, or they're trying to trick you into admitting to violations you didn't commit." "So what do I do?" Jessica asked. "Don't show up wherever they tell you to go. Don't respond to it at all. And honestly, you might want to consider filing a police report. This is starting to cross the line from aggressive HOA enforcement into potential harassment." Jessica thanked him and hung up. She looked at the fake summons again, feeling a mix of fear and anger. Patricia wasn't just being a difficult HOA president. She was actively trying to intimidate and possibly defraud Jessica and others in the neighborhood. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the people Patricia had targeted over the years, all the money that had been collected and possibly stolen, all the stress and fear that had been inflicted on families just trying to live in their homes peacefully. She made a decision. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to pay the fake fines, and she definitely wasn't going to show up to any fake court. Instead, she was going to fight back properly, legally, and with evidence. What Jessica didn't know was that Patricia was already planning her next move, and it was going to be far more aggressive than anything she'd done before. Patricia had decided that Jessica needed to be made an example of, someone the other residents could see being punished for daring to challenge the board's authority. The fake summons was just the setup. The real show was about to begin, and it would involve people showing up at Jessica's door claiming to have authority they absolutely did not possess. Authority that, if Jessica had fallen for it, could have resulted in something far worse than just fines and letters. The trap was set. And Patricia was counting on Jessica being scared enough to comply with whatever came next. Saturday morning started like any other weekend. Jessica was in her garage organizing some boxes, listening to music on her phone and trying not to think about the HOA drama for a few hours. She'd spent the previous evening backing up more security camera footage and documenting everything in her increasingly thick file folder. She deserved a break. Around 10:30, she heard a car pull up in her driveway. She figured it was a delivery, or maybe one of her neighbors stopping by. But when she looked up, her stomach immediately tightened. Two men were walking toward her garage, and something about them felt wrong. They were both wearing dark blue uniforms that looked official at first glance. The shirts had patches on the shoulders and badges pinned to the chest. They wore utility belts with what looked like radios and other equipment. But as they got closer, Jessica noticed the details didn't quite add up. The uniforms looked almost like costumes, too new and too perfect, like they'd just come out of a package. "Jessica Miller?" the taller one called out. He was probably in his late 20s with a patchy beard and an overly confident stance. "Can I help you?" Jessica stayed where she was in the garage, her hand casually moving toward her phone on the workbench. The shorter man, who looked even younger, pulled out a wallet and flipped it open to show some kind of badge. "I'm Officer Rodriguez, and this is Officer Palmer. We're with HOA enforcement. We need you to come with us." Jessica's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "HOA enforcement? I've never heard of that." "It's a division of the Community Standards Department," the taller one, Palmer, said. He sounded like he was reciting something he'd memorized. "You've been summoned to appear before the HOA Judicial Board for multiple violations. Since you failed to respond to the summons, we're here to escort you." Every alarm bell in Jessica's head was ringing. She took a small step back, trying to keep both men in her sight while moving closer to her phone. "I'm going to need to see more identification, and I'd like to call my attorney." Rodriguez's friendly expression shifted slightly. "Ma'am, this isn't optional. You're required by HOA bylaws to comply with enforcement actions. If you refuse, we're authorized to detain you and bring you in." Jessica's hand closed around her phone. "Detain me? You can't detain anyone. You're not police officers." "We have authority granted by the Homeowner Association," Palmer said, moving a bit closer. "We don't want this to become difficult, but we have protocols we can follow if residents refuse to cooperate." Jessica unlocked her phone screen, keeping it low and out of their direct line of sight. "Let me see those badges again." Up close, Rodriguez held out his wallet, and this time Jessica really looked at it. The badge wasn't metal. It was plastic, the kind you could make with a label maker and a laminating machine. The photo looked like it had been printed from a home computer. The seal that was supposed to look official was clearly clip art. She could even see tiny air bubbles under the lamination. "These are fake," Jessica said flatly. Palmer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, you need to stop being difficult and come with us. Right now, I'm not going anywhere with you. You're not law enforcement. You have no authority to detain anyone." Rodriguez pulled out his phone. "We're going to have to call this in. You're refusing to comply with a lawful order from HOA enforcement." Jessica almost laughed at the absurdity, but the situation was too tense. These men were in her driveway wearing fake uniforms, trying to intimidate her into going somewhere with them. Whether they were dangerous or just stupid, she needed to get away from them. "I'm going inside now," Jessica said, starting to back toward the door that connected the garage to her house. "Don't follow me." "Ma'am, stop right there," Palmer said, his voice getting harder. He moved to block her path. "You're not going inside until you come with us. We have authorization to use necessary measures to ensure compliance." That was it. Jessica's fear turned into sharp, cold anger. "Get off my property now, or I'm calling the police." "We are the police," Rodriguez said, but his voice wavered a bit. He was clearly less confident than his partner. "No, you're not," Jessica said, and she hit the emergency call button on her phone. "But they're about to be here." Palmer's face went red. "You're making a huge mistake. The board is not going to be happy about this. Do you know how much trouble you're in?" Jessica had backed up to her door now, her hand on the knob. "The 911 operator is listening to everything you're saying right now. I suggest you leave before actual police show up." For a moment, both men just stood there, uncertain. Jessica could see them looking at each other, having some kind of silent conversation. Then Palmer stepped forward and his hand went to something on his belt. "Ma'am, final warning. Come with us voluntarily, or we'll have to take you into custody by force." Jessica's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy, but she kept her voice loud and clear for the phone. "I'm a homeowner being threatened by two men in fake uniforms claiming they have authority to arrest me. I've locked myself in my garage. They're still on my property." The 911 operator's voice came through the speaker, calm and professional. "Ma'am, stay on the line. Officers are 3 minutes away. Do not open the door." "Are the men armed?" Jessica looked at their belts more carefully. "I don't see any weapons, but they're threatening to forcibly take me somewhere." That seemed to break the spell. Palmer grabbed Rodriguez's arm. "Come on, man. We need to go." "The board said," Rodriguez started. "Forget what the board said. Real cops are coming, move!" Both men hurried back to their car, a beat-up sedan that was trying to look official with a magnetic sign on the door that read, "Community Standards Enforcement." Jessica watched through the garage window as they backed out of her driveway way too fast, nearly hitting her mailbox. She moved to her front window, phone still connected to 911, and saw a police car turning onto her street with lights flashing. The fake enforcement car sped off in the opposite direction. 2 actual officers pulled into her driveway less than a minute later. Jessica opened her front door, still shaking. "Thank you for coming so fast." The female officer, whose name tag read Chen, held up a hand calmly. "You're safe now. Can you tell us what happened?" Jessica explained everything while the other officer walked around her property, taking photos and notes. She showed them the fake summons she'd received days earlier, pulled up screenshots of the violation letters, and even offered to show them her security camera footage. Officer Chen's expression got more serious as the story unfolded. "You said they claimed to be HOA enforcement officers?" "Yes, they had fake badges and everything. They said they were going to detain me and take me to some kind of HOA court. The other officer, whose name was Thompson, came back from checking the perimeter. I found fresh footprints in the flower bed on the side of the house. Looks like someone's been walking around the property, and there are some marks on the fence like someone tried to look over it." Chen nodded and turned back to Jessica. "Do you have any idea who sent these men?" Jessica hesitated, then made a decision. "I think I do. And I have evidence. A lot of it." She invited the officers inside and spent the next hour showing them everything. The fake violations, the inflated fines, the security footage of Patricia prowling around her property at night, the financial irregularities that Beth had discovered, and the testimonies from 36 other homeowners who'd been targeted the same way. Officer Chen made several phone calls. and by the time she was done, she looked at Jessica with something like respect. This is way bigger than harassment. We're looking at potential fraud, extortion, and now attempted kidnapping. Those men claimed authority they didn't have and tried to forcibly remove you from your property. Do you think you can find them? Jessica asked. Thompson smiled slightly. Already got a partial plate number from your neighbor's Ring camera across the street. And trust me, when we catch them, they're going to tell us exactly who put them up to this. Chen handed Jessica her card. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Keep your security cameras running. Don't open your door to anyone claiming to be from the HOA unless they can show real legal documents. And even then, you have the right to verify everything first. What about Patricia? The HOA president? We'll be having a conversation with her very soon. If she's behind this, she's committed several serious crimes. HOAs have limited legal authority, and impersonating law enforcement is a felony. After the officers left, Jessica sat in her living room for a long time, just processing what had happened. 2 men had shown up at her house wearing fake uniforms, trying to trick her into going with them. If she hadn't been suspicious, if she hadn't looked closely at those badges, if she'd been scared enough to just comply, who knows what would have happened? She thought about all the other people Patricia had targeted over the years. Had she tried this on anyone else? Had anyone else been intimidated into paying fake fines or admitting to violations they didn't commit? Jessica's phone buzzed with messages from the neighborhood group. Word was already spreading. Someone had seen the police at Jessica's house and wanted to know if she was okay. She sent a quick message saying she was fine and would explain later. But even as she typed, Jessica knew the real story was just beginning to unfold. Patricia had gone too far this time, and there would be consequences. The fake enforcement officers didn't stay hidden for long. By Monday afternoon, Officer Chen called Jessica with an update that almost made her drop her phone. We found them, Chen said. Pulled them over about 40 miles from your neighborhood. They weren't exactly master criminals. Once we started asking questions, they folded pretty fast. Jessica sat down at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her with the growing file of HOA documentation. Who are they? The younger one, the guy who called himself Rodriguez, his real name is Tyler Bennett. He's Patricia Henley's nephew, 23 years old, currently unemployed, living in his mom's basement. The other one is his friend, Brian Walsh. Neither of them has a criminal record, which probably won't be true for much longer. What did they say? Did Patricia really hire them? Chen's tone shifted, becoming more official. I can't share all the details of an ongoing investigation, but I can tell you that both men admitted Patricia paid them to intimidate you. Tyler said his aunt told him it was all legal, that HOA enforcement officers were a real thing in some states, and that you were a problem resident who needed to be taught a lesson. She promised him $200 for a few hours of work. Jessica felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. So she deliberately sent people to my house to scare me into compliance. It's worse than that. Brian, the friend, he was a little more forthcoming. He said Patricia told them that if you refused to come voluntarily, they should make it clear they could force you. She even gave them the fake badges and told them exactly what to say. She wanted you terrified enough that you'd either pay the fines immediately or move out of the neighborhood entirely. That's insane, Jessica said. All this over HOA violations that don't even exist? Well, that's where things get interesting. We contacted Patricia to ask about the incident. She showed up at the station with a lawyer, which is her right, but the lawyer looked about as confused as we were. Once we explained what her nephew and his friend had confessed to, the lawyer asked to speak with her privately. When they came back, Patricia was claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd never authorized anyone to impersonate law enforcement. But Tyler said she paid him. He did, and we have text messages between them discussing it. Tyler kept all the messages because he thought he might need proof that she'd hired him. Not the brightest move, putting a crime in writing, but it's helpful for us. Jessica leaned back in her chair, trying to process everything. So what happens now? We're building a case. Tyler and Brian are being charged with impersonating law enforcement officers, attempted kidnapping, and criminal trespass. Those are serious felonies. Patricia is looking at conspiracy charges, solicitation to commit a crime, and possibly extortion depending on what else we find. And Jessica, we're finding a lot. What do you mean? Officer Chen paused. I probably shouldn't tell you this yet, but you've been helpful and you deserve to know. We executed a search warrant on the HOA office this morning. We seized financial records, Patricia's computer, and boxes of documents. There are irregularities going back at least 6 years. Your friend Beth, the one who looked at the public records, she was right to be suspicious. The forensic accountant who did a preliminary review thinks there's at least $80,000 missing from the HOA accounts. Jessica's jaw dropped. 80,000? Maybe more. Patricia's been collecting fines and dues, then siphoning money into personal accounts disguised as vendor payments. She created fake companies and paid them for services that were never performed. Some of the legitimate vendors the HOA used confirmed they were paid far less than what the records show. Patricia kept the difference. So all those ridiculous violations and inflated fines, that was all to steal money. Looks that way. And it gets worse. We interviewed several other residents this morning based on the list your neighborhood group provided. An elderly couple on the east side of the development, the Johnsons, they nearly lost their home last year. Patricia claimed they owed over $15,000 in violations and late fees. They scraped together the money by taking out a loan against their house. We looked at the actual violations. Most of them were completely fabricated. Jessica felt sick. That's horrible. The Johnsons aren't the only ones. There's a young family who paid over $8,000 in fines while the husband was deployed overseas. A single father who paid $5,000 to avoid legal action. Patricia targeted people she thought couldn't or wouldn't fight back. People on fixed incomes, military families, new homeowners who didn't know better. Why didn't anyone go to the police before? Some did, Chen said. We have 3 reports from the past 4 years. But HOA disputes are usually civil matters, not criminal. The previous reports didn't include evidence of fraud or intimidation like what happened to you. When those residents came to us complaining about unfair fines, we told them to handle it through civil court. We didn't realize there was a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of an HOA board. Jessica thought about all the hours she'd spent documenting everything, all the fear and frustration. So me fighting back, that's what finally exposed everything? You refusing to be intimidated, staying calm when those fake officers showed up, documenting everything and calling us immediately. That's what broke this open. Patricia made a huge mistake when she decided to escalate to intimidation instead of just sticking with paperwork fraud. The moment she sent those men to your house, she crossed a line that we couldn't ignore. After Jessica hung up with Officer Chen, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and sent a message to the neighborhood group, explaining what was happening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Relief, anger, gratitude, and shock poured in from dozens of residents. Mr. Chen from down the street sent a private message. Thank you for not giving up. I should have fought when it happened to me. I'm sorry I didn't. Beth, the woman who'd examined the finances, messaged, I knew something was wrong with those numbers. I'm so glad someone finally investigated. Others shared their own stories now that they knew they weren't alone. One woman had been fined repeatedly for her children's chalk drawings on her own driveway. A man had paid over $3,000 because Patricia claimed his fence was 6 inches too tall, even though it met all city codes. A family had been threatened with foreclosure over a garden shed that was supposedly too visible from the street. The pattern was clear. Patricia had been running this scheme for years, carefully selecting targets and maximizing profit, while maintaining enough legitimate HOA business to appear normal to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Tuesday evening, Jessica was watching the local news when a story came on that made her grab the remote to turn up the volume. There was Patricia on the screen, being walked out of her house in handcuffs. The reporter was explaining that the HOA president had been arrested on multiple charges including fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and extortion. The news story included interviews with several residents, though their faces were blurred and voices disguised. One woman talked about nearly losing her home over fake violations. A man described the intimidation tactics. The reporter mentioned that police expected more charges to be filed as the investigation continued. Jessica's phone rang. It was Officer Chen again. Just wanted to give you a heads up before you see it on the news. Patricia was arrested this afternoon. Her lawyer tried to argue she should be released on her own recognizance, but the judge set bail at $50,000. Given the evidence of financial fraud and the fact that she tried to intimidate witnesses, the judge considered her a flight risk. What about Tyler and Brian, already arrested over the weekend? They're cooperating fully, hoping for reduced sentences. They gave us everything. Text messages, phone calls, even a recording Brian made of Patricia, explaining exactly what she wanted them to do. Apparently, Brian had a feeling something wasn't right and recorded the conversation on his phone without telling anyone. Jessica couldn't help but feel some satisfaction. So she's actually going to face consequences. Significant ones. The district attorney is very interested in this case. White-collar crime, abuse of power, targeting vulnerable residents. This is the kind of case that makes headlines and sets precedents. Patricia's looking at serious prison time if convicted. And the other board members? We're investigating them too. Right now it looks like Patricia was the mastermind, and the others were either complicit or negligently ignorant. 2 of them have already resigned and hired lawyers. The third is claiming she had no idea what was happening, which might be true. Patricia apparently ran the board like a dictatorship, and the others just rubber-stamped whatever she wanted. After the call ended, Jessica walked through her house, looking at all the little things Patricia had cited as violations. The curtains that were supposedly wrong, the flowers that weren't approved, the mailbox that was the wrong shade of black. All of it had been part of a scheme to steal money and maintain control through fear. She thought about the garden gnome still sitting in her garage, the one that started this whole thing. Tomorrow she decided that gnome was going back in the front yard, right where it belonged. And if anyone didn't like it, they could file a complaint with a board. 3 weeks after Patricia's arrest, Jessica stood in the community center meeting room watching it fill with more residents than had ever attended an HOA meeting before. Every chair was taken and people lined the walls. The local news had sent a reporter. Even some residents who'd moved away years ago had driven back to be part of what everyone was calling the Riverside Meadows Reckoning. The emergency election was about to begin, but first there were some things that needed to be addressed. A lawyer specializing in HOA law had volunteered to moderate the meeting and explain what the investigation had uncovered. His name was Michael Torres, and he'd spent the past 2 weeks reviewing every document the police had seized from the HOA office. "Good evening, everyone," Torres began, and the room fell silent. "I know you all have questions. I'm going to answer as many as I can tonight. First, let me be clear about something. What Patricia Henley did was not normal HOA management. It was organized fraud on a massive scale." He pulled up a presentation on the screen behind him. Over the past 6 years, Patricia collected approximately $94,000 in fake fines and fees from residents of this community. That money went into personal accounts she controlled. She created false vendor invoices, inflated real costs, and pocketed the difference. She also embezzled from the HOA's reserve fund, which is why your community has been told for years that there wasn't money for needed repairs. A murmur ran through the crowd. Torres continued, "The district attorney's office has filed 23 separate criminal counts against Patricia. She's facing up to 15 years in prison if convicted on all charges. Her nephew Tyler and his friend Brian are facing lesser charges in exchange for their cooperation. They'll likely serve 2 to 3 years and have probation after that." An older woman near the front raised her hand. "What about our money? Can we get it back?" "That's complicated," Torres admitted. "Patricia has assets, including her home and savings accounts. Those have been frozen pending the outcome of the criminal trial. There will also be civil lawsuits. The HOA itself can sue for the embezzled funds. Individual homeowners can sue for the fraudulent fines they paid. It's going to take time, possibly years, but there's a good chance you'll recover at least some of what was taken." Mr. Chen stood up. "What about the 3 other board members? Are they going to face charges too?" "The investigation is ongoing, but here's what we know so far. Board member David Park appears to have been completely ignorant of Patricia's schemes. He attended meetings but didn't review financial documents and basically rubber-stamped everything Patricia presented. That's negligent, but probably not criminal. Board member Linda Frost is more complicated. She signed off on some of the fake vendor payments. She claims Patricia told her they were legitimate expenses, and there's no hard evidence she knew about the fraud. The DA hasn't decided whether to charge her yet." "And the third member?" someone called out. Rebecca Martinez resigned immediately when the investigation started. She's cooperating fully and has provided testimony that Patricia controlled all the financial information and didn't share details with the rest of the board. Rebecca appears to be a victim of Patricia's manipulation rather than a co-conspirator. But again, the investigation is still active. Torres clicked to the next slide. "Now let's talk about what happens next for your HOA. The existing board is dissolved as of tonight. You're going to elect a new 5-member board who will serve until the next regular election. This new board's first job will be to conduct a complete financial audit, review and revise the community bylaws to prevent future abuse, and begin the process of recovering stolen funds. Jessica had been asked to say a few words before the election, and she nervously walked to the front of the room. She'd never been comfortable with public speaking, but after everything that had happened, she felt she owed it to the community to share what she'd learned. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica. Most of you know my story by now. When I moved here 8 months ago, I thought I was joining a nice, quiet neighborhood. Instead, I became Patricia's target because I asked questions and didn't just accept her fake rules. She looked around at all the faces watching her. But here's what I learned. I'm not special. I'm not braver than anyone else. I just got lucky. I had the time and resources to fight back. I didn't have kids depending on me. I wasn't elderly or on a fixed income. I wasn't deployed overseas. Patricia chose the wrong person to intimidate. Not because I'm strong, but because my circumstances gave me the ability to fight when others couldn't. Jessica's voice got stronger. Every single person she targeted before me did nothing wrong. You're not weak for paying those fines. You're not stupid for believing someone in authority. Patricia was a con artist, plain and simple. She used her position, fake rules, and intimidation to steal from her neighbors. That's on her, not on any of you. The room erupted in applause. Jessica felt tears in her eyes but continued. So tonight, when we elect new board members, let's choose people who want to serve the community, not control it. Let's choose people who believe in transparency, who will share financial records, who understand that an HOA is supposed to maintain property values in common areas, not generate profit by terrorizing residents. After Jessica sat down, the election proceeded quickly. Volunteers counted paper ballots while Torres explained the revised bylaws the new board would need to adopt. These included mandatory financial audits, term limits for board members, a clear process for residents to appeal violations, and most importantly, a requirement that all rules and fines be clearly documented in the official bylaws, with proper resident notice and input. The new board was announced an hour later. It included Beth, the accountant who'd first discovered the financial irregularities, Mr. Chen, who'd been targeted by Patricia years ago, a retired lawyer named Dorothy, who'd been wanting to get more involved in the community, a young dad named Carlos who worked in property management, and a woman named Rita who'd lived in Riverside Meadows for 20 years and knew the neighborhood inside and out. Their first official act as a board was to vote unanimously to void all outstanding fines issued during Patricia's tenure. The room erupted in cheers and more than a few tears. Mr. Johnson, the elderly man who'd taken out a loan against his house to pay Patricia's fake fines, sat with his wife, both of them crying with relief. Beth stood up as the new board treasurer. We're going to review every single fine issued in the past 6 years. If you paid money to this HOA during that time, we want to know about it. We're setting up a claims process. It's going to take time to sort through everything, but our goal is to return every dollar that was fraudulently collected. The meeting finally ended near midnight. As people filed out, many stopped to thank Jessica personally. Some hugged her. Others just shook her hand and told her their stories. One woman pulled her aside and said, "My husband wanted to just pay the fines and forget about it. We almost moved away because of the stress. Thank you for fighting when we couldn't." Over the following months, the story gained national attention. News outlets ran features about HOA abuse and the importance of oversight. Patricia's case became a cautionary tale used in legal seminars about homeowner association management. Several states introduced legislation to increase regulation of HOAs and protect homeowners from fraud. Patricia's trial took place 6 months after her arrest. The evidence was overwhelming and she was convicted on all but 2 of the charges. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to all affected homeowners. Her house and other assets were seized and sold, with the proceeds going into a victim compensation fund. Tyler and Brian, who had testified against Patricia, received reduced sentences as promised. Tyler got 2 years in county jail and 3 years probation. Brian got 18 months in probation. Both expressed remorse for their actions, though Jessica wasn't sure how sincere it was. She'd forgiven them in her own way, mostly because they'd been manipulated by someone they trusted. But she hoped they'd learn something from the experience. The civil lawsuits took even longer, but eventually, most residents recovered a significant portion of the money they'd been defrauded out of. The Johnsons got back almost all of the $15,000 they'd paid. The military family received compensation for the stress and financial harm they'd suffered. Even people who'd moved away years ago were able to file claims and receive settlements. Jessica became something of a local hero, though she was uncomfortable with the attention. She'd done what anyone should do when faced with injustice. She'd stood up for herself and documented everything. She hadn't expected it to uncover a massive fraud scheme, but she was glad it did. A year after Patricia's arrest, Jessica was working in her front yard on a Saturday morning when a car pulled up. A young couple got out looking around the neighborhood with the excited expressions of potential homebuyers. "Excuse me," the woman called out. "Do you live here? Can you tell us what the HOA is like?" Jessica stood up, brushing dirt off her gardening gloves, and smiled. "Actually, I can tell you a lot about the HOA. Come on, let me give you the full story." She invited them to sit on her porch and spent the next 30 minutes explaining everything. The good, the bad, and the lessons learned.